Today we're going to be talking about administrator overview, but also just an overview of Team Dynamix as a whole, both Team Dynamix corporate and how you can interface with us, as well as your interfaces that you have access to. So I am going to start sharing my screen here. But what we're looking at here is a couple of things. So there's two sides of this equation. I like to call it a fence. So the black bar down the middle here, think of that as a fence. So we're going to be talking about the right side of the fence today and the left side of the fence. So the right side are things that exist within Team Dynamix corporate and the things that you have access to. We're going to go over each of these items. And then we're going to focus on the left side of the fence and talk about the things that are on your side that you have access to with your interfaces. So we're going to start out on the right side of the fence and talk about the Team Dynamix community site, what's held there, the solutions area, which houses our knowledge base, which is all embedded within the client portal, and then a project record that we manage to for our implementation here. And this will give you a kind of a sneak preview of how projects look over that you'll eventually be working on projects on your side. And then this thing called enhancement requests. There is a accessing the Team Dynamix community site and registering on that site. And that's registering here for this community site. Again, think of Team Dynamix corporate. So think of the right side of the fence as being in Columbus, Ohio. And on the left side of the fence, when we're over here, think of that as being in Imperial, California. So the community site is available to all of our customers to access information and look at services, knowledge base areas, all of those things. The great thing about the community site is that all of our customers have access to it, and many of them pose questions amongst each other. So you can leverage the community site to see what other customers are doing, ask questions. Hey, has anybody done this? Has anybody done that? And most likely, because the majority of our customers are higher ed, people love that academia and love to help other people out. Folks will probably answer it pretty quickly. In the community site, you can also access our knowledge base, which is extremely helpful, which also is part of my note that I send out after each call, houses these knowledge base articles, right? And if you haven't registered for the site and set up your own username and password on the right side of the fence, you won't be able to access these knowledge base articles and links that I send out to you. And there's a wealth of information that you have access to on the in this knowledge base. The client portal again houses this knowledge base and the solutions part of it, and that's where you can access the project record that I'm going to be tracking. And I'll show you, if you haven't been added, I'll try to add you to that so you can see what that's going to look like. You can submit new product ideas, what we sometimes call enhancement requests, by leveraging this service here. And then we take that into consideration in our product roadmap. And we're going to dive into the right side of the fence and take a look at several things here. So I'm in the solutions. I'm actually in our knowledge base. So this is actually what a client portal can look like, right? And it starts out, typically when you come to the client portal, you land on this thing called the home page. And this will house, depending on how you set it up, this will house information and or pictures that are relevant to your client portal, right? The client portal is a web portal, kind of visually friendly. So you guys will change your logo out here. Your color scheme will be different. Obviously, you could put your campus picture up here. Maybe down at the bottom, you can put a footer with some address, phone number, email, website information down here. You can build out the body of this to house information in here as needed. And then this top bar here has applications or pages that house information that are, we'll see other customer examples, and they'll all look pretty similar to this setup and structure, but you can design it from a branding perspective to more correlate to your color scheme and style, that sort of thing. The first thing that we want to do, and oftentimes there's a lot of information here. So there's services that you could submit. And I'll start with what we just got done talking about, that enhancement request, right? That link that was there for the enhancement request. Sometimes if you search on either enhancement request or product idea in the search bar here, and it's taking you to this, I have a product enhancement idea, and then it's going to ask you about the value, strategic alignment, roadmap. But when you get here, all you have to do is hit this submit an idea, fill out the form, which is capturing this information, and then it will go into our Team Dynamix product development team that will prioritize and review all of the ideas that come in. But to be able to access this, you need to register for the community. So it's a three-step process. Step one is to create a community account, and you register here and do that. Step two is to request access to your project, which that is to submit a service request here. And then step three is to see that project. So I'm going to have Jonathan do this step here, but before he can do that, I need to activate him as part of this project. So if I pull up my green screen, again, we've talked about the enhancement request. We've registered for the community site. We looked at the client portal. We'll look at the project record in just a minute. We're going to talk about the knowledge base. So again, in our client portal is the knowledge base area. We will, on your side of the fence, when we get to your client portal service catalog, the knowledge base is an area that we'll start from scratch, and there won't be much information in there. But on the right side of the fence, as you can imagine, our knowledge base is quite large. We have a lot of information in here. And a lot of these also have how-tos, demos, videos, step-by-step instructions on them. And so again, registering for the Team Dynamix community site allows you to get access to the knowledge base. And also the knowledge base and the structure of it, if you look at our knowledge base, if you look at other customers, all look very similar. They have categories and then articles. And the same in the service catalog area. They have categories, but then they have services. So structurally, they look the same. And there is quite a bit of information in there. And you could take a lot of time to poke around to search for things. But we are in the Google generation. So probably the easiest thing if you're looking for something is to come right up here and to do something like I'm looking for Cardwall information. And if I type in Cardwall, it's going to search the entire client portal, knowledge base, services, questions, and I get a lot of things that say Cardwall on them. And the third one down, overview of the Team Dynamix project Cardwall, is right here. So this might answer the question I have or give me some information that is extremely helpful. The key area that I would say to come here to do and to favorite, right? I have a bunch of favorites that I've done, is the training guides. So when you have access, when you've registered for the Team Dynamix community site, which Jonathan has, he could be doing this with me if he's already in here. Search on training guides, and that will pull up a list of training guides so that you have easy access to this. So everything that we cover and all of the sessions that we go over are captured in one or more of these training guides. So there's an administrator training guide, project manager training guide, an ITSM training guide. The training guide as a whole will list all the other ones. So I would favorite this one, the training guide category essentially. And that's going to have an administrative training guide in here, project manager, reporting guides, a technician training guide, and a team member training guides. So what's a team member? A team member is somebody who is on projects as typically a subject matter expert that's a resource on a project. I typically think of the people that I put on tasks on my project plan are team members, right? So eventually, towards the end of our PPM implementation, we'll be doing end user training, and it might combine a little bit of train the trainer and or team member end user training. So that's what this guide helps to support team members. How do they access the tool? How do they find projects that they're working on? How do they find the tasks that they're working on? How do they interact with their project manager and other team members? All of that, that's the team member training guides. Once I get down into the guide, over here is a button, add to favorites. And then if you ever see anything like this that says team member guides, like, well, where is it? See the attached files. Down in the right over here are typically where those are at. And we usually, for these handbooks or guides, we usually have two flavors. They're identical. One's just a static PDF, and one is an actual Word document. The reason it's a Word document is that you can take this guide, strip out the Team Dynamix logo, put your logo on it and share it with your team members so it looks more like an Imperial Team Dynamix team member handbook as opposed to the out-of-the-box team member handbook with the Team Dynamix logo on it. So these training guides are extremely helpful. All of the topics that we're going to be covering in all of our sessions are housed in one or more of these training guides. Again, I would favorite those and refer back to them, or simply pull out, and download this training guide. Then you don't have to favorite it. You save it on your local drive or even on a shared drive that you share with your team. Some of the topics that we're going to be covering today are covered in this administrative training guides here. And again, as you drill down into these, it is going to once again pull up several different files. That green and gold spreadsheet that we were looking at earlier, that's this one right here. These kind of have two different flavors, implementing ITSM and implementing PPM. So there is some crossover between them, but this one is more ticket specific. Obviously, this one's more project specific. Let's just take a quick look at what this guide looks like, so you're familiar with it. So it's a configuration guide, and looking at the contents, we're going to be going over a lot of the foundational setup ideas, security roles, how to add users, that sort of thing, and then we'll start getting into project specific. So some of the first few foundational setup items will be similar on tickets and projects, things like accounts departments, types, that sort of thing. We'll cover all of those. But you can look and see in here on the project side, this configuration guide will go over some of the high level project PPM configurations. And as you can see, this is a 20-some page document from a really high level, and it'll cover a lot of the material. So when I send you my notes on the specific topics, it will be a lot of it's covered in here as well. So you should always have easily accessible information, either that I've pushed out to you, or you can come to the knowledge base area and find that information. So that covers all of these areas except for the project record. And what does the project record mean? So again, this is a sneak preview inside our tool, and I'm going to show you, this is part of the plan component of our project record. I apologize, this can be a little bit confusing when I talk about these two concepts, because we're going to see things that look completely different. So Jonathan is accessing the Team Dynamix corporate site as a client license person, right? Think of a client license person as somebody, typically students, faculty, and staff, who can only access your interfaces via your client portal, right? So they can look at your service catalog, they can look at knowledge base articles, they can look at your home page, they can look at projects if they've been given visibility permissions to see those projects, but they can only see things inside this thing called the client portal. You all are going to have more access than that. There's two other interfaces that we'll talk about. One's called TD Next, or the users area. That will house where your technicians will live on a day-to-day basis, and project managers will live on a day-to-day basis, and team members and managers and that sort of thing. And then in addition to that, you all will have access to the TD admin, the administrative place where we build out your tool. So those three are your three primary interfaces. The client portal, which is available to everybody, many of which have that free client portal license. They are that's the only place that they can see things. With that concept, Jonathan on the right side of the fence in Team Dynamix Corporate is there as a client license person. So he cannot access what I can access in my TD Next and in my TD admin for Team Dynamix Corporate in Columbus, Ohio. He's only seeing things through the vantage point of somebody with a client license, right? And the reason I bring that up is this is a card wall plan that we start working on for your project that we track internally. And just to kind of go over, just giving you a sneak preview of the card wall. And typically these are leveraging the Agile methodology, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. So typically the future phase is kind of the backlog. So I'm going to move that over. Current phase not started would be next, in process, and completed, and then on hold. So usually things go from left to right. We will do a deep dive of the card wall methodology on a upcoming project management session that we'll schedule in a couple of weeks. But what we're starting with here are cards, and these cards house information that we're going to be going over. So we talked about earlier, Jonathan, about the core integrations. So this card houses the core integration pieces, and these are subtasks on this card that we're going to talk about on that call next week, Thursday. So we're going to talk about your authentication method, the email replies service, and the people import. That's going to be the primary things we talk about. And then once we get those things configured, we'll check those off. So this is the card wall. And the reason I'm showing this to you is to give you a sneak preview of what's to come, but also to let you know that there is a slight difference of how Jonathan is going to see this same information. So all the information here he'll be able to see. It's just a little bit different visually that he'll see it when he's looking at it as only a client licensed person can see it. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to stop sharing now. Perfect. So again, yep, I can see your screen here. So Jonathan is on the right side of the fence. He is in the Team Dynamix Corporate Client Portal. And within the Client Portal, he is in the Projects Workspaces area. So the Projects Workspaces area of everyone's Client Portal houses active projects that you are a member of. So I just made Jonathan a member of this project, and he can see a lot of information in here, right? He can see the status on here that Marcus provided about a week ago. I'll be providing statuses periodically and sending those updates out to you as well. We can see the managers on the project. We see the details of this project, the health that it's currently at. We'll be doing a deep dive over what all of these items mean in here. At the top, we see that Jonathan is on the details tab, or the details, what we call component of the project record. And there's several here: feed, announcements, briefcase, calendar, contacts, issues. And as you scroll all the way to the right, it ends in plans. Now, we're not going to do a deep dive on each of these today, but Jonathan, if you could scroll up and then click on the plans. This is going to pull up that card wall plan, which is the second one, not the Gantt one, but the one below it, implementation modules and tasks. And this will show the same information that I was just showing you, but in a different view. And the reason it's in a different view is because the tool is built slightly different for just the client portal users. And right now, Jonathan is in Team Dynamix Corporate as just a client license user. So he can still see all of the cards, but just in a different list view, right? Or he could switch it to details view. There's up below the word implementation. And this is just going to show a little bit different of a view from a status perspective. But to go back and see the subtasks, if he goes to the list view again, and if you recall, if you scroll down to the current in process one and click on the core integrations, for example, that will show you the 5 subtasks to the right of this card. And these are the subtasks, right? So it's the same information, it just looks a little bit different, again, because Jonathan only can access this tool through the client portal, right? And as we get into the tool a little bit more, it'll be more easily understood. Alrighty, I am going to steal the presentership again, and I am going to take over. We're going to go back to our green and gold sheet now, and we've covered everything on the right side of the fence, and now we're going to be talking on the left side of the fence. We're going to be talking about your interfaces. And the first thing you'll notice that down here at the bottom, username and password will be the manual one that you've either been given or will set up for you until we get your single sign-on configured. And once that's done, then you'll be able to leverage your single sign-on credentials to log into your interfaces. These are the primary interfaces that we talked about, the first 3, the client portal. That's also known as TD client. And the reason we just use these as kind of short term for that. So sometimes we'll be saying, well, that's in TD client, that's in TD next, that's in TD admin. So TD client is your client portal that will be working on design, color scheme, where you'll be building your service catalog, your knowledge base, where people can see projects once they're activated, that sort of thing. That's in your client portal, otherwise known as TD client. The user's interface, which we haven't seen yet, is also known as TD Next. And as you can see, your URL is imperial.teamdynamics.com. And then based on the interface you're in, it's /TD Next, /TD Client. What's happening in TD Next is that's where the day-to-day users work, right? Project managers, project team members, PMO managers, directors, other directors and managers from a reporting perspective, administrators live in there, help desk managers, help desk technicians, all of the folks that are looking at tickets, looking at project tasks, looking at data from around the tool on a day-to-day basis, live inside TD Next or the user's interface. Where we're going to be spending the bulk of our time over the next several weeks is inside the administrators area, where we build out and configure parts of the tool to be used in both the client portal and in TD Next. And that's this thing called TD admin, right? So they're all the same front, imperial.teamdynamics.com, but TD client, TD Next, TD admin. You also have access to a sandbox. I want to walk over that with you for a little bit. So the sandbox is for you to utilize for whatever needs that you may have. It is typically used when we do large imports, as well as for other things that you may want to build out and look at there. Primarily, though, we are going to be building things in your production environment. We're not going to break anything. It just prevents rework from being done, because this sandbox, like the word says, is indeed a sandbox. It's not, or some people might consider a development environment. And the reason that I say that is it's not a development environment from I can build things in my development environment and then I can turn around and push what I built from dev to prod, from development to production, and have things stick. Our sandbox doesn't do that. Our sandbox just houses data that you manually put in here or import in here. And so the sandbox is typically used when we do like large imports to make sure that the import worked correctly. We can check the data first, and then we rinse and repeat and do that same type of large import in our production interface. So again, it's more of a accurate description of what a sandbox is, and it's not a dev environment where we build and then push it to production. We don't do that at all. We typically build in production, but use the sandbox periodically for other purposes. With that said, there is also a sandbox refresh schedule, and I'll send you information on that. The sandbox refresh is a overwrite of your production environment every quarter. So the first Monday of a quarter, we take a snapshot of your production environment and we snapshot that to Sandbox. So anything that was previously in Sandbox is replaced by your production environment. And then from there, you have a workable Sandbox that you can look at and do whatever manipulations you may want to do in Sandbox. So if we're looking at this from a calendaring perspective, the next quarterly refresh is Monday, July 6th. So from now until Monday, July 6th, your sandbox will be extremely barren, right? If you haven't built anything in there, there will not be much in there at all. But as of late Monday night, early Tuesday morning on July 6th, it will look exactly like your current production environment looks like at that point in time. And then the next quarterly refresh would be Monday, October 5th. And then the next one would be Monday, January 4th. There is a mobile environment that you have access to. And I will say this, the mobile area is not a mobile application that mimics the production environment. It does not map it one for one. It is a mobile friendly, and it was primarily designed a couple years ago so that help desk technicians that are going from building to building, location to location, can pull up and update tickets on a easily on the fly. So it is formatted to work with handheld devices, right? It is not a full-blown 100% mobile application yet. That is something we're still working on, but it provides a majority of the functionality, both on the project side and the ticket side, so that if somebody were, being mobile, they could be able to update items on there. So that's something you have access to. But for the most part, the three primary interfaces that we'll be working in will be TD Admin, where we'll be building, configuring, setting things up. TD Next, which is where we'll be looking at the items that we've built and how they transition into the day-to-day work for users. And then some of the things that we build in TD Admin we'll be able to see and test out in the client portal as well. So I got a couple of other tabs down here. I want to go over these real quickly. I'm going to start, even though we're going to start out with PPM, I'm going to just touch on ITSM real quick.
Okay.
So this is just a quick overview of the tool and what we'll be doing in it from a ticketing perspective, right? So the IT service management, we have ticket set up. So again, I'll send you this spreadsheet. You can just use this as a refresher, but think of this in chronological order from yellow to blue to green. On the ticketing side, we'll be doing a lot of the ticketing application setup, which is done primarily in TD Admin, but there are some things that can be built inside TD Next. It's where your ticket application resides, so where all of your help desk technicians will be able to access tickets they're responsible for. To do that, these are a lot of the things that we'll be working on setting up on the ticketing side: services, forms, attributes, which are just custom fields on your form, ticket types and classifications. We'll be talking about different levels of ticketing: basic, intermediate, and advanced. And those kind of they kind of map to ticket tasks, task templates, and workflows. And then some advanced ticketing items are things like service level agreements, automation rules, surveys, and then all of the technician capabilities. So with that set up, then we'll talk about the ticket request intake process, which is going to be leveraging your client portal, right? So those client license people, students, faculty, and staff, they will only have access to the client portal, where they'll be able to see your service catalog, all of the services that you provide in your catalog. That's where they'll submit ticket requests, fill out a form. We can look at the different attributes potentially that they need to capture information on a ticket before they submit it. And then when they submit the ticket, well, that'll cover their ticket intake process. And when we're building all of these things, we'll be testing the intake process along the way. And then that ticket goes over to the ticketing application in TD Next for your technicians to find and search on and work on. And then there's a ton of sorting and filtering. There are how to update a ticket we'll be going over, and then of course reports and desktops or dashboards on how to find data and report on data, and then how technicians can interact with the ticket tasks and workflows that were built, and then all of the actions that technicians can take on tickets and up until the closure process. This is kind of a chronology of what we'll be doing when we start the ITSM implementation.
Sounds good.
Similar concept over here on the PPM, but a little bit more structured. So our portfolio and project management is broken down into a 3-phased approach. And everybody has a pretty good idea of project lifecycle. So phase 3 over here, think of that as active in-flight projects, right? And you guys probably have some existing projects in flight that you want to put in the tool, potentially start looking at data, reporting on, that sort of thing. That can easily be done immediately. So that's something we'll talk about, injecting projects right into the tool and start working on them immediately. We could potentially do after we set some things up from a foundational perspective. However, true portfolio and project management introduces 2 phases prior to the actual projects, right? And those are the project request intake process and the project request review process. And the idea behind these 2 phases is that you're slowing that request train down, so to speak, because you're working on active projects as well as other tickets and other operational items in your organization. It requires some thought and some process and methodology before you bring on new projects that are going to contribute to increasing capacity and availability by your staff, right? So that's the idea behind request intake and request review, is that we already have an amount of work that we're working on. Some of it's projects, some of it's tickets, and now we have multiple requests coming through. How do we determine, should we even do it, right? And that's what portfolio planning starts to think through. Do we have the capacity? Do we have resources that have availability to do a new project? Do we have the expertise, right? And so the intake process slows the train down by making people think through it, making your requesters go through that request process via the client portal typically, and finding a service in your service catalog that says project request on it, and filling out a form and a business case which kind of map to a project charter. And then ultimately, after they've captured all the data, they submit a request. That request then goes into phase 2, and typically part of a PMO's function is to guide the request through the approval process. And that ends up in this thing called the portfolio planning application, where the request is reviewed. It has to go through a workflow, and we'll be helping you design a workflow. And a workflow has a number of steps that you need it to go through to be reviewed accurately before it eventually either gets approved or denied or potentially put on hold, right? And so when a project request is coming through the system, it might get kind of ping pong back and forth between the PMO and the requester, and data shared back and forth. And so it might cycle in phase 1 and 2 kind of back and forth. But eventually that request is going to be reviewed sometimes by a project review board or by the PMO itself or different departments. And at some point in time, someone's got to make one of three decisions: yes, no, and yes, but wait, right? No means, hey, we already have a system that can do what you're doing, so we're going to decline this request, and you can do it leveraging these other tools we have, or something else, or we just can't do it at all. We don't have the capability. So that could potentially be no, and it could get declined. Could get approved and said to start immediately, so yes, and away we go. And it could be yes, but wait, we can do it, we just can't do it right now because we don't have capacity. Let's put it off for a couple of months. So it's approved, but it's going to just sit idle, and we're going to kick it back off in 2 or 3 months when we have more availability. Once it gets approved here and we want to get working on it, we kick it over into phase 3. And once we cross this black bar here, I call that crossing the Rubicon, going past the point of no return. Once it's created as an active project, it leaves request land. So think of phase 1 and 2 as request land. And once it gets approved, activated, staffed, it crosses over the Rubicon to project land, and it will reside in project land until it is completed and closed out or canceled, right? Once it is a project, it can never become a project request again. So it'll have to live over here. And so think of that as project requests start in the client portal, and then they sit in the portfolio planning application in TD Next until they go through this full review process. Once it gets activated, it's still in TD Next, but it's in projects workspaces, and it'll stay as a project again until it's successfully completed or canceled. We are going to be looking at all 3 of your interfaces real quick, just to get you familiar with them, and then we'll start looking at security roles. So if you can go ahead and share your screen. Alrighty. So this is a frequent landing page that you'll land on. And again, the users area takes you to TD Next, client portal to TD client, administrators to TD client. I'm sorry, to TD admin. So let's click on users to start. Alrighty, so what we're looking at here is the TD Next interface, right? It's more of a utilitarian interface for users, right? Again, think of this as day-to-day users that are going to be in the tool. So in the left navigation, I'm sorry, in the upper left corner is an application menu. Let's take a quick look at that just to kind of get your bearings here. So these tiles, also known as applications, are giving you access to many parts of the tool. Just for reference, the very first tile is desktop. The very last tile is help. Everything in between is alphabetical, right? So as an administrator, you have access to the admin area. That's that wrench. We'll click on that in just a second. We'll talk about each of these tiles over time. They'll kind of take care of themselves. But suffice it to say, if we go back to that PPM 3-phased approach, phase 1 and phase 2 is, think of that as portfolio planning with the project request intake, project request review. There's a portfolio planning application. That's where a lot of that happens. And that's the tile that says portfolio planning. It's got a little speedometer on it. Projects workspaces, that's phase 3. So when projects are activated after they've gone through phase 1 and 2, or they're injected right into phase 3, they end up in project workspaces. Your tickets application is where your tickets will flow to and be worked on by your help desk technicians. And then many of these other tiles we'll talk about over time. Whenever you're in one interface, you can get to other interfaces. So you can get to TD admin by clicking on the wrench, And you can get to the client portal by clicking on the client portal tile. And those are the three primary interfaces. So most of the time we'll have all three of these interfaces pulled up. So yeah, go ahead and click on the admin wrench there. And this is your TD admin area. We'll come back to this in a second. Let's go back to TD Next, and that's the one that the link up there says 11.1. Click on that and go to Client Portal. Click on the Client Portal tile. And this is your bare bones client portal, right? So we're going to swap out your Team Dynamix logo. We're going to give you a home page. We're going to design your service catalog and knowledge base all over time. So eventually it will look a lot prettier than what it looks like here. In the upper right is your name, Jonathan. If you click on that, when you're in the client portal here, you can change your password right here. So that test 1, 2, 3, go ahead and change that password because I don't want anybody listening to this to be able to use your login to do anything. So let's go back to the administrate TD admin area. And the first thing we want to see here on this page, this is our TD admin base page, so to speak. And in the body, under details, we see the version you're on. There's 13 active users. So that's the details tab on this page that we're looking at. To the right of that, let's go to the administrators tab. This is going to list the people that have access as administrators to your environment. So they can do a lot of the build and setup. They have access to TD admin. These people also have access to TD Next and TD Client. Many of these folks are Team Dynamix staff members, right? Aaron Crane, Brian, Caitlin, Carrie, Chris, Marcus, myself, Sirkin, William. So over time, you may eventually want to delete the Team Dynamix personnel out. I would say during your implementation, you probably want to leave us in here in case we need to, myself for sure and Marcus for sure. The other folks, in case I were to be traveling, I would be out. If they ever needed to access your environment, they would have easy access to assist you in any fashion. But certainly, once you kind of go live, then you can easily come in here and delete out any of the Team Dynamix personnel that you want to trim down this. So let's look at the personnel from Imperial that are administrators. So James, Jonathan, and Omar currently. You can add administrators here. To add them, though, you need to have a user already created, and that user must have what's called an enterprise security role set on their user record. So we'll see that in a minute.
Okay.
But if you were to go to the green add button, that's how you add administrators.
Okay.
We'll show you how to do that in a second. To the right of the administrators tab is license usage tab. Let's click on that. And this is going to show us the licenses that are being used currently. And this is where Team Dynamix does their typical license control or periodic auditing. So I'm going to walk through all of these blocks here because there's quite a few, and some of them are legacy licenses. So what I mean by that is that several years ago, and we're going back 4 or 5 years, our reporting feature in our tool wasn't quite as robust as it is today. So 4 or 5 years ago, to get some of the reporting capabilities, you had to purchase an add-on that was this thing called Plus Reporting. So any of these boxes that have a Plus Reporting, those are for older customers that have that as part of their contract licensing. So you will not have any licenses that say Plus Reporting because most, either the technicians or enterprise already have that reporting embedded within that licensing structure. All right. Same thing with project managers. We used to have a separate project manager license, but the capabilities are sufficient for either that technician license or the enterprise. So the project manager typically falls in one or those two based on what you might need them to have access to. So that one should be 0 as well. The student technician, you guys might have, most folks already have that embedded in their contract. The student technician is a low-cost student technician license because a lot of students roll through a help desk typically, right? And so some organizations that have quite a few students that work in their help desk might purchase 10 or 5, 10, 15 student technician licenses. You guys might not have that. That's okay. That is an active license structure. Team members, as we talked about before, are typically project team members, so project subject matter experts. So for organizations that just purchase the PPM usage and implementation, typically have team member license and enterprise user licenses. For organizations that purchase ticketing or both ticketing and PPM, they use the technician license and the enterprise. So because you guys have both, the technician license will suffice for your project team members. So that client license, those are free licenses, and you have an unlimited amount of those. They're typically available to students, faculty, and staff that only need access to the client portal to, again, look at information that you populate on your homepage, look at your service catalog, request tickets, leverage knowledge base article for self-help, and in some instances potentially leverage the project request service in your service catalog. So the boxes that will have numbers in them once we go live will be enterprise users, technicians, and clients. The rest should be 0. This client license will allow them to be put on a project, to be able to open issues on projects, to update specific tasks that they're assigned to on projects. So a lot of capabilities, even though the only part of the tool that they are in is the client portal. They won't be able to get into TD Next, and they won't be able to obviously get into TD Admin. All right, the last tab here is the security tab, which is what we'll leverage from a single sign-on perspective. So that one we'll talk about configuration of that next Thursday. And we are now going to talk about security roles and users and how to enter users and attach their appropriate security role for them, and in which places in the tool require security roles. So in the left navigation, let's go down to users and roles. And in here, let's go to users. And we'll see that we have both 13 of you already embedded in here as users. So as an administrator, you have access in here. If anybody were to come to you and say, I don't remember what my password is. So let's say Jeff were to come to you and say, I know my username is my email, but I don't recall what my password is. You can click on Jeff's name here. Either one of them. Yep, either Jeff, that's fine. And once their user record comes up, in the left navigation under green actions button, there's reset password right there.
Gotcha.
So if anybody comes to you and like, I'm sorry, man, I forgot, I wrote it down and I lost it, then you can reset their password there. And then they can go in and change their password after you give them some generic one. All right, let's X out of Jeff's user record here for a second. And let's go to security roles. Security roles. So the enterprise full access is what the 13 of you have currently been given. And eventually you'll probably have that 30 number in there if that 30 number is accurate for your users, if it's 30 and 50. We need to set up at a minimum 2 other security roles. One that's going to house those 50 technicians, and then one that's going to house all of your free client license people. So let's go to the green plus new button. And we're going to create the name here. You control what the name is. So let's call this one technician. And then the license type, let's select the technician from the drop down here. And now let's talk through what settings are appropriate. So that drop down that you just went to the right of that drop down says select all, clear all, select default. So let's walk through these three buttons. Clear all means that it'll clear any of the permissions that have been checked and then let you start over essentially. To the right, select defaults. If you click on that, go ahead and click on that. Select defaults. This will check the checkboxes under these permissions that will give technicians these capabilities in the tool. So this is Team Dynamix's, quote, typical practice for a technician role. So if you believe us that this indeed is what your technician should have access to, then the select defaults works for you. If
Yep, looks good.
Yep, and so looking at these, some of them are grayed out, so you cannot even select them.
That's cool.
But there are some that you could potentially select. So this allows you to leverage your technician security role in a couple of ways. And I'll walk you through the couple of ways that you might want to consider thinking about technician roles. Right? So
Okay.
for now, let's go ahead and hold right here. Go up and click on the blue help button. That's going to be probably the first thing you're going to want to peruse through, probably with James and maybe Angie, and talk and look at these permissions to see if our technician should have those, and kind of map them up with the default ones. So this is just telling you a sentence or two about what each of these permissions do. So as you start reading through some of these, it'll make sense why they're turned off typically for some technicians, and some of them are checked to be on for technicians here. So this might be one where you print out and you have it as a guide if you want to come back and update the technician license permissions. So let's X out of this screen and go back to the checkbox screen. What our licensing and security role structure allows for is if you have different levels of technicians within a help desk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some help desks will have a senior technician and a junior technician. And in those cases, that maybe the senior technician is the name of this role. The license type is just technician. And go over to the right and hit the select all button for now. Go ahead and do that. And you'll see that opens up all of the boxes that a technician license type can access. We see that there are still grayed out boxes that they cannot access. Those are only accessible by an enterprise license, but all the other potential checkboxes are selected for this role. So if you wanted to, you could create a senior technician or a level 3 technician, whatever you might want to call it, and give that senior person all of the permissions that a technician license can access. Or to keep it simple, we do it like we do here. One name technician, it's the technician license type. We select the defaults, we save it, we're off and running. Yep, so what I would do is in the name up here, I would keep it technician, and then I would do dash defaults for the name, just so you know that this is the one that you're gonna select the default on. And then now over select defaults, and then go up to the save button. And at least we have a pretty standard technician license type ready to go. And then again, you can look at the help and see if you want to manipulate these. And then you can come back and, so the technician license type is really what we're counting. We don't care how many of the, if you were to rename and have 3 different levels, that's up to you. It's still leveraging just one technician license type, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's X out of here. We're going to want to do the same plus new for a client role. So for the name here, let's just call it client. For the license type, it is again going to be the client. Let's select the defaults and then hit the save button. So this is the tool overall. Let's X out of here, and we're not quite done with security roles yet. Security roles also this is given these three types of security roles access to the overall tool. Then the applications themselves have different security roles that you can define. So what I mean by that is back out of users and roles in the upper left. Let's go to applications. And these are the applications you have access to, and you can create additional ones, but these are the out-of-the-box ones, pretty standard that you have. Let's go into the client portal application. And in the left navigation, let's go to users and roles and security roles. And let's click on the default security role. So for this one, we probably want to, because it's being applied to those 13 users, the easiest way to set this up correctly is to, let's see, change the name of this security role from default security role to enterprise. And then on the license type, change that to enterprise, and then select all, and then let's save that. And the reason we did that, go ahead and X out of here now, and then hit the green refresh button. The reason we did that was because you have 13 users already with this license type. The other way to do it would to go into each user record and manually change that, and that can be a bit of a pain. But we still need a couple of additional roles here. So let's go to the plus new button. And we're going to create the same thing here. We're going to create a technician. And yeah, it can be defaults. And then we're going to grab technician, select defaults, hit the green save button. And we're going to do one more. And we are going to do client, select defaults, save. All right. Now we have to do the same thing 2 more times for these 2 other applications that we see here. So if we back out of users and roles, and we back out of applications, and we go to tickets, yeah, we'll have to do the same for assets too. And in the left navigation, scroll down, users and roles, security roles. We have an enterprise license already in here. So let's create, we actually don't need a client license here, but we do want a technician one. So let's do technician default, technician, select defaults, save. And the last one is our assets, which we should again have an enterprise. We just want to make sure we have a technician one here too. So let's back out of users and roles and back out of applications. And now let's go back to users and roles and users. And we're going to create a new user. So if you can think of somebody else who might be on the calls, or maybe a technician that's not listed on here yet, we're going to create a brand new user.
Okay.
By going to the, create user. And for that person, we need their email address as the username. And then copy that before you hit the next button, because we're going to need this in 2 other places. So now let's hit the green next button. And in the security role, so this is really where the rubber meets the road on this security role. So it's a mandatory field here, and this is going to be one of these three, right? And so it's most likely going to be yeah. And then first name, Edward, last name, so Sana, okay. Auth provider for now is Team Dynamix. We'll leave that in there. You do need to create a password. Before you do that, while you have that email address copied, scroll down to the email and to the alternate email field. If you scroll down, paste it in primary and the alert notification one right there. Yep, paste it there, paste it there. All right, now scroll back up and let's look through some of these other fields and talk through a couple of them. So a password, you would need to, it's a mandatory field, so you're going to have to remember this password and give it to Edward. So write it down if you don't mind, and then give it to him. You can always come back and reset it if you forget it too. So we at least have a organizational ID. Most of these other fields are not mandatory, but you can leverage them if you needed. Most organizations don't. The organization is your college, right? Imperial Valley Community College.
Mm-hmm.
The default account department, we're going to want to talk about that. We'll probably start talking about that on our next call after we do core integrations. But the default account department is what department does Edward belong to? My guess is probably information technology, right?
Right.
Or help desk or something along those lines. So we'll create that account department first, and then it'll show up in a drop down here to be added to a customer record, or I'm sorry, to a user record. I did want to mention the request priority. That field down there is used pretty, not very often, I should say, but it can be used for very important people, VIP, right? So like maybe for your president's user record or CIO, so that anytime this person, he or she, submits a ticket request or a project request, that it automatically sets the priority to the value you've given here based on their status. That, you know, hey, if the president submits a ticket, boy, we got to jump and move. So that's what this request, most of the time this is not set, but if you have VIP people that you want to default their priority on anything they submit, that's where you would do it. TD Next access is always selected. You always want that selected for anybody that is more than a client licensed person. So that one's already there. We don't have any locations or location rooms built in the tool yet, but if you do, you can circle back and put think of a location as a building, a campus building, and then obviously the room would be typically the room that they are in, right? So
right.
Maybe it's main hall is the location and the room is, you know, room 101. You can't enter manually anything in here. It has to be part of your location database. And
Okay.
so that's gonna, yeah. So that we'll have to build out your locations first. And right now there's none in here.
Okay.
Click on the question mark next to this person is confidential, because this can make this record confidential so people can't see who's requesting it through the client portal. And this is a brand new capability in the tool, primarily because we are dealing more and more with healthcare, university hospitals and such. So privacy is of primary concern there. So if you have confidential users, you could leverage this. Contact information, so we have the emails. You certainly can put in other phone numbers if people need them on here. Many times this will come through via your people import and populate that way. Then you also have your work address. Scroll down in here a little bit more. At the bottom, we see things like reports to and resource pools. We'll talk about those two concepts, but for now, let's go ahead and hit the green finish. And this will finish creating the user record. Oops, my bad. Needs to be 7 characters. I think you're at 6. All right, hit the green finish. So we're almost done setting up the user record. So think of setting up your users as a two-pronged approach, creating the record and giving it that security role. And then the next is the applications they have access to. So think of the applications as those tiles in TD Next that they should have access to. So yep, let's click on the applications. And next, we want to use, we want to do a couple things here. The primary client portal, that one is the only one that you have access to. So you guys can have multiple client portals if you need additional client portals. Typically, it's just going to be the out of the box one that you have, but you can have more than one. The easiest way for Edward here would be to go up in the upper right corner and hit the select all button. So again, that's going to only select all of the applications that Edward can have access to based on his security role. So we can see that portfolio planning, portfolios, project templates, resource management. You see how those are grayed out?
Mm-hmm.
Edward cannot access those because those require an enterprise license. So the ones that are selected are the applications that a technician can have access to.
Okay.
So that's the second prong, is giving folks an application access. But we also need to add, remember those security roles that we created in assets and in tickets and in the client portal?
Yep.
So in assets, we want to change that security role to technician. In the client portal, we want to change that to technician. And yep, perfect. So let's go ahead and hit the green save button. And we have successfully added Edward in as a user. Potentially, you could do this. You definitely don't want to manually create your client license users, right? Those are going to be students, faculty, and staff. So
Okay.
if there are users that you need to have access to the tool in the short term, like in the next week or two, for those couple of users, I would say go ahead and create them here. It's always a good exercise to do anyway. And so that if anybody else is going to be a regular member of these sessions and they're going to have admin privileges, so like if James or Angie are going to be doing what you just did, I would say each of you, my homework for you guys would be to create 1 or 2 users. Each of you do that. So you build up the muscle memory, because the biggest thing that's going to happen is you're going to forget about adding these applications. You're going to create a user. It's easy enough. They got their email. You give them a security role. You give them a password, a couple of other things, and you hit finish and you're done, and it's created. But then you don't come back to the applications, and then they can't access certain parts of the tool. Well, just good muscle memory to build out and create some users, apply the applications. Before we end, I want to show you one more third prong. If you want to add somebody as a administrator, right? That's a third step.
Okay.
So we cannot add Edward as an administrator because he does not have an enterprise license. He only has a technician license. So let's X out of Edward's role here. I don't know, is Angie going to be an administrator?
I thought we saw her in the administrator. Yeah, we can put Angie.
Okay, so copy her username, or if you know her email address, go ahead and copy her email. X out of here.
X out of here? Okay.
Yep. And back out of users and roles, so go up to the upper left corner.
Mm-hmm.
And click on your college name, Imperial Valley Community College right there. And then back on our main page, click on the Administrators tab. Yep, go to the green Add button. And then enter in Angie's email address. And then most likely administrators should have all of these checked permissions here. And this is going to give Angie access to TD admin. Hit the save button, and now you've created an additional administrator. So
Very cool.
adding client license people, adding technicians, adding most of your enterprise license is a two-pronged approach. Create the user, apply the appropriate security role, give them application access to the applications they need access to, right? Additionally, you could make people administrators of the tool that need to build and do the setup. That requires an enterprise security role. And then on top of that, they have to be given administrator access here in TD admin.
Gotcha.
So that takes us to the top of the hour here. I think this is a good place to stop for today.